Statue of Liberty, was not in New York Harbor when the America's Cup started racing in New York in 1857. There was nothing like that. That was an empty little deserted island at that point. Oh yeah, did you take that picture last week as we left? Did anybody take that picture? You were able to get that picture. Actually, that picture is the summer leaving Bayonne. The original America's Cup, they didn't see that. That's leaving Bayonne. Nor did they see that, which is the summit going under the bridge. That was taken 2 weeks ago from the Staten Island Ferry, and you could see, you could do that tomorrow morning as well. You could see how close you are to the bridge. And we did the demo, and that's what we saw. That boat, the white sailboat, leaving us in the dust, getting back, and we were done at 2:30. They were done at 12:30, but we had one hell of a time in the afternoon. New York, New York. That's my wife and David Hartman. How many of you remember David Hartman from Lucas Tanner TV show? You remember him. And David Hartman from Good Morning America when he was the host of Good Morning America on ABC. Well, this is in 1999, and David Hartman had left Good Morning America and decided, and he's telling me about this, he says, I want to do a PBS special. How many Americans are in here? How many non-Americans are in here? Okay, so I don't have to explain what TBS is, public broadcasting. And he had this idea, and he was going to go to WNET, Channel 13 in New York with it. And basically, what he was going to do was take certain streets in New York, like 42nd Street, or Broadway, or go through Greenwich Village, and he would do the history or talk about the stories of these streets in New York, like 42nd Street, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And David said, it's a solid idea. People watch the ball drop every year at Times Square. What do you do New Year's Eve? What could you do on New Year's Eve? You watch the ball drop with the Dick Clark special, right? Which is now Ryan Seacrest. And he said, this is a solid idea because people know what 42nd Street is. They know what Times Square is. They know what the ball is. They know what the UN is. They know things on 42nd Street. What do you think PBS told them? Yes or no? No. They told him no. They didn't think it was a good idea. He did get the money for one show, though, from WETA in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., of all places. They gave him the money. He did one show, The Streets of 42nd Street. Now, if you're in the New York market and you get Channel 13 or you get Channel 21 or Channel 50 in New Jersey, there is a form of the show with a guy by the name of Barry Lewis who goes through various neighborhoods of New York City. The early days of New York, it was founded in 1624. It was a trading post, the Dutch Republic. In 1664, the English took control, named it New York, after King Charles II of England, his brother, the Duke of York. It served as the capital of the United States from 1785 to 1790. How many of you here live around Manhattan? Nobody. Good, I can tell the story. There is a street in Lower Manhattan. It's called Cherry Street. And the first seat of government in the United States was on Cherry Street in Lower Manhattan. There is absolutely no trace of that government ever existing on Cherry Street. Not even a plaque. Nothing. George Washington said goodbye in New York. Well, he said goodbye to his troops in a bar, of course, Francis Tavern. I first went there when I was in 4th grade in 1964. It is still a working bar. It is also a museum. If you go to Lower Manhattan, if you have time, go there. It's an interesting place. It's where George Washington lifted his final beer to the troops and said, I'm out of here. Goodbye. Going back to Mount Vernon. Never see you again. You'll never hear from me again. Guess Washington was wrong, wasn't he? Became president. It's at 54 Pearl Street. It's at the corner of Broad Street. And during the American Revolution, it served as headquarters for George Washington. Yeah, why not? General should have a bar, shouldn't he? So anyway, it served as the place for George Washington, and during the peace negotiations, hey, why not? You're going to negotiate peace, why not in a tavern, right? But it was in a tavern, and some of the federal offices back in the 1780s were in the bar. The bar, think of that. The British troops evacuated New York in November 25th, 1783. In the building, George Washington says, goodbye, going home, going to see Martha, I think. How many of you remember Hamilton before he was Hamilton on Broadway? Yeah, there was a guy named Hamilton who spent part of his time in Bermuda, Alexander Hamilton. He's a play now. Ask most kids, who's Alexander Hamilton? Oh, I got to go see that play. He's a play now. But if you do go to Manhattan, that's one of the most beautiful buildings. It's the Alexander Hamilton Custom House. It was left for dead. The Smithsonian Institute took over, and it is a gorgeous building, as you can see. And that's one of the free attractions, and it's the Museum of the Native American now, the Smithsonian Institute's satellite museum. Who's Alexander Hamilton? Do you know who the real Hamilton is? Or the fake Hamilton? Anyway, there's the Compromise of 1790. And there was a deal that was cut between Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton said, hey, look, you go down to Washington, take the government with you. We're going to keep the financial center here. In 1791, Hamilton established the first bank. In 1792, he helped create the Coinage Act, which established the U.S. Mint and the dollar. But Hamilton's on the 10. We don't worry about the dollar because it's George Washington. Brooklyn. If you're in New York, any native New Yorkers here? No, good. If you're a native New Yorker, you never, in the old days when everybody spoke with these, dems, those, a toity, toid, and toid, it was Brooklyn. Not Brooklyn, Brooklyn. In 1898, New York added Brooklyn. The first subway was born in New York, although if anybody go to Boston Commons? The first subway in the United States was in the Boston Commons. First one. Right across from the Capitol over there. Brooklyn comes in 1898, binds the city together. The first half of the 20th century, New York becomes a world center for industry, commerce, and communications, and now we'll give you the background of that. Of course, how many of you here trace your ancestors back to Ellis Island? Nobody? Some of you, everybody came through a different way? Well, 12 million immigrants came to Ellis Island. It's a place I haven't been to. I haven't been to the top of the Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty, or Ellis Island. I guess I'm a New Yorker. From 1892 to 1954, Lee Iacocca saved it, went there, raised money, and there was a museum that opened. And the museum opened in 1990 with Lee Iacocca behind the money to get that museum built, and that's Ellis Island. Of course, September 11, 2001, the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Anybody been to the Trinity Church? One person. Two people. Isn't it amazing? That thing survived. That thing actually survived. The church survived, no damage. And that's a bell that was given by England to the United States after the September 11th attack, a friendship bell that occasionally is rung. But Trinity Church, St. Paul's Chapel, has a significant place in American history for not only that, but back in the Revolutionary days. It is on 209 Broadway between Fulton and Vesey Street. It's the oldest surviving church building in Manhattan, and it survived September 11th. I'm going to move on because I want to talk to you about the stories finally. And that is the new World Trade Center, or the Freedom Tower, that's being built. And that's from Cherry Street, of all places, that picture was taken. And this is East Broadway. East Broadway is a hodgepodge of neighborhoods. But we're going to talk about David Hartman's 42nd Street. See that building in the middle there? Anybody know what that building is? It's the Chrysler Building. One of the great Art Deco buildings of all time. And that's where David Hartman was going to start his 42nd Street special. Now you go down 42nd Street and you could spend 2 days or 3 days going down 42nd Street. Goes from river to river, and there are so many things that you could spend time in, and most of them are free. Starting on the East River. First Avenue and 42nd Street. It was a property owned by the Rockefellers. All of a sudden, World War II ends, and there's something called the United Nations that was built. That was when we went to a party at the United Nations a bunch of years ago, and the United Nations was built there on the Rockefeller property. And there's a nice garden there, and there were tours of the United Nations. You could spend just one entire day at the United Nations, and guess what the cost is? It's free. So David Hartman says, let's start at the United Nations, and we'll go from the United Nations out the other way. How many of you watched Superman? Not the new Superman, the old Superman's movies. Where did Clark Kent work? He worked at the Daily Planet. Where was the Daily Planet building? Daily Planet building was on 2nd Avenue and 42nd Street. It's the old Daily News building. The Daily News is not there anymore. The Daily News is over at 11th Avenue and 30th Street because the rent got too high for the Daily News at the Daily News building. So they moved. In that building now is the Tolerance Museum in the Superman building. And the Tolerance Museum is not only about Holocaust, it's about other things that happened around the world. And there are all kind of memorials to various other things that happened. It's about a 2-hour romp at the Tolerance Museum. And it's actually a pretty good place because it tells you about things that went around the world, some of which you wouldn't know about. And that's over at 42nd Street and 2nd Avenue. And then there's that building. Do you see what they're doing in New York behind that building? They're building these pencil buildings. That one behind there is 120 stories, and it's ugly. Take a look at, I took this picture just to say, which building is nicer? Which building is aesthetically nicer? What do you think? The Pencil Building or the Chrysler Building? So the Chrysler Building is another place that David Hartman would have stopped. Take a look at it. It's Art Deco. It was Art Deco of its time, the 1930s. It's still a functioning building, and it's a gorgeous building. And, of course, if you go next to Chrysler Building, you got Grand Central Terminal. How many of you know the story about Grand Central Terminal facing the wrecking ball in the 1970s? You want to come up here? We could talk together. Who saved Grand Central Terminal? Jackie Onassis. Jackie Onassis saved Grand Central Terminal in the 1970s. New York had two great train stations at one point. Penn Station, which was over at 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue between 31st and 33rd Street, and Grand Central Terminal. Penn Station fell into disrepair by the 1960s, and the owners decided, we got to get rid of Penn Station. Anybody from Washington, D.C. area here? Have you gone to the Washington Zoo? What's in the middle of the Washington Zoo besides the jaguar and the cougars? The eagle from Penn Station in New York was shipped down there. It's right in the middle of the Washington Zoo, which is a great place to go and also free. So Jackie Onassis was looking at Grand Central Terminal, and Penn Station was knocked down. It's gone. It was replaced by a round building called Madison Square Garden, which was never built right. It was the fourth Madison Square Garden, a round building with seats at Harvard, which would be good for a football stadium, but terrible for an indoor arena. So Jackie Kennedy Onassis at the time went on a one-woman crusade to save what she thought was a gorgeous terminal. She did. It's been cleaned up. You could see the ceiling now. It's aesthetically one of the great buildings in New York. It's always crowded. And there are TV shows that take place in Grand Central Terminal. And behind that was the Pan Am building. And the Pan Am building is now known as the MetLife building. And to the side used to be the Commodore Hotel. It's the Grand Hyatt to the side. Now, after you get sick of Grand Central Terminal and you decide, well, you know, I need some place to go, you could go visit the psychic. There are thousands of psychics in New York, and they never go out of business. I don't understand that. But behind the psychic is the New York Public Library. How many people have been to the New York Public Library?